had to choose a slow searing ride on Satan's carousel, or watching helplessly by as your best friend got it on with your lover, what choice would you make? I'm Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn. A crude scenario I've just painted? Possibly. But hell isn't settled, folks.
Alright guys, he's Todd McFarlane. I'm Jason Horn. This is Longboxer, where we dig through old long boxes of comics, try to find something good. And I've been going through the first issues of all the launch comics from Image Comics. And this is Spawn #1, Todd McFarlane's creation. I assume you're familiar, at least with the basics of Spawn. You know, when I think of Todd McFarlane, it's interesting, man. I've watched so many interviews and read interviews, and like I've consumed more Todd McFarlane in the last few weeks than I have in years and years. And I gotta tell you, like, Todd McFarlane, say what you will, like, yeah, he's crazy. Like, his crazy ego, you know, just, he's Todd McFarlane. But man, what an interesting dude. I think of all these other Image guys, and there are things that are interesting about all of them, essentially, but I don't think most of them I don't really find that interesting now, but he is still, whenever he's talking, it's just like, I'm just right there with him. I'm not even saying I agree with him or anything, no matter what he's talking about. I probably don't agree. I don't know. But I can just listen to the guy talk all day. Super interesting guy. His brain is not normal. But yeah, so let's get into it. Spawn #1. So this is the second Image comic to come out after Youngblood. And if you haven't watched my Youngblood #1 video, I'll link it below. But you know, this is the first, or the second comic, but it's I think one of the few other than Youngblood to have the Malibu Comics logo, because this is when they were still being distributed by Malibu Comics. And so and it's dedicated to Jack Kirby. That's pretty awesome. I mean, say what you will about all those Image guys, they loved Kirby. They even had characters, you know, based off of Kirby. It's kind of crazy. But yeah. So Spawn, if you're not familiar, he's a guy who's he died. He made a pact with the devil because he wanted to see his wife again. And guess what? There's some strings attached. He comes back and he's like, getting deep into the premise is one of the problems with this issue. Other than, like, he's, you know, he comes back, he's dead, he's like, you know, got this rotting corpse thing, and he has these powers, and he doesn't really have all of his memory. So I mean, that's about that. Like, there's all these complicated things about, like, he's not in his own body is like in the ground, and there's this clock that counts down when he uses his powers. There's all these like complicated things that it's hard to really get down. Like, unless you know the premise of the book, it is really hard to get from this first issue what is going on, and like what are the rules, essentially. Like, that's the thing I kept trying to figure out. Like, what?
What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? When you just turn black and you can't switch back, well, you gotta go and find out the rules. I think we're in the whiz. Don't force the whiz thing.
What is he? Like, what was he doing? Like, what is the point? Like, what? So he's like a hellspawn, but I don't know what that means. I don't know if I ever found out. So I think I bought 2 of this first issue. I've been trying to remember, and I think when I was a kid, I bought 2 issues of the first issue of Youngblood, and I think I bought 2 issues of the first issue of Spawn. But I can't remember for sure. I still have like 2 or 3 first issues of Spawn, and I think I bought around the first 15 or so issues. I quit buying it when he quit drawing it, which is kind of like, that's kind of like the way I handled all these Image books. When these dudes stopped drawing it, I was done. And so one of the many things that's interesting about about Spawn and McFarlane in general is, so like all these other dudes are launching their Image books. They're all these artists. And this came at a time like, you know, growing up, when these guys were kids, and you know, even when I was a little kid, it was more like the way it worked was people would be like, are you a DC guy or are you a Marvel guy? Or maybe like, are you a Superman or a Batman guy? But when these guys came along, when McFarlane and Liefeld and Jim Lee came along, it was no longer like, people weren't following characters the way they used to. They were following creators. So it became, are you a Todd McFarlane guy or are you a Jim Lee guy? So these guys became rock stars and launched their own books. And it came at a time where it's like, you know, sales were going through the roof. He'd killed it at Marvel. But he wanted, I think more than all the other guys, wanted control, wanted to own their stuff, wanted to be getting all the money. And that's the stuff I keep coming back to, where it's like, man, say what you will about all these guys and specifically McFarlane, but like, it's pretty impressive. I couldn't agree more. Every time I would hear him talk about leaving Marvel and just the BS that they were like telling him like how to draw stuff, it's like, I'm right there with you, Todd. Do your own thing, own your stuff, get to do what you want to do. There was no reason for him not to. I mean, I guess it had just never been people had done indie books, like big guys had done indie books that, you know, just it didn't ever become a career for them. It wasn't like they could leave the big two behind because of it, but these guys made it happen. And that's, man, something I don't understand. Well, one of the many things I don't understand, but one of the things, it's like there have been books, like indie books, like Star Slammers from Walt Simonson. Like there've been books like, you know, stuff like this before, like creator-owned stuff from big, like Walt Simonson's one of the best artists in comics. Like, but this just, you know, it never caught on. It never became like their thing that could help them like leave like Marvel and DC. But like these guys, say what you will, but they did it. And for some reason, Spawn is what did it for this guy. So let's get into like some of Todd's earlier work. So some of the first things that he did, he did some other stuff before this, but this was kind of the first stuff of his that I have, is he started doing some stuff at DC. So this is Infinity Incorporated. And like right off the bat, so this is like 86. So this is like right around the time or right after Infinite Crisis and stuff. So 86. Cape's already like a thing for him. He's already super into it. I mean, good grief, the Cape stuff. Right off the bat. A lot of this stuff, it looks kind of like, you know, it doesn't really look full-on Todd McFarlane. Here and there you can see some McFarlane stuff. But this early stuff, it looks like kind of John Byrne-ish kind of. But yeah, like not bad, but definitely not full-fledged McFarlane yet. But like I'm saying, these capes. But he also did some, this is Batman Year 2 trade paperback. So he did the pencils on most of this. And this stuff looks pretty McFarlane-y, whatever. This stuff looks like McFarlane, especially towards once he gets going. I mean, again, capes. I didn't read this story as a kid. I wish I could have. That would have been interesting. He's one of those guys that, out of the Image guys, I just wasn't really familiar with his work as much. I guess because I've been trying to figure out why, and I think it's just because he wasn't drawing an X book. He wasn't doing the X-Men or X-Force. He was doing Spider-Man back then, and I like Spider-Man. He was actually the first comic I ever bought was Spider-Man, but he just wasn't. Spider-Man just wasn't someone I cared. Once I got onto the X-Men, like that was it. I would still read some Silver Surfer here and there, but the X-Men and then X-Force, New Mutants, all that stuff, that's like all I cared about. So I guess that's why I wasn't familiar, and I didn't know about this back then. So I just wasn't familiar with his work, and so I don't think I was really looking forward to Spawn #1 the way I was like Youngblood or Wildcats. But once it showed up, I was super into it. Like, I couldn't have been more into it. This is kind of ridiculous to say, but like out of all those Image books, it was one of the better written books out there. So if you look, like, at reading this after reading Youngblood #1, like, this is a breath of fresh air. Because at least, it actually delivers the premise, whereas like Youngblood #1 barely even does that. But this does. It's like I said, it doesn't give a lot of details of what all is exactly going on, but there's way more meat on the bone here than a lot of the Image #1s. Way too much like all monologue stuff, and he did that a lot. Even before this, he did like a lot of. It's very. Another thing I was thinking with this stuff and some of the other stuff, it's very Frank Miller inspired. This, at least at first, and Frank Miller would actually work on the book eventually. And that's another thing, like the collaborators he got. So out of all these Image guys, so they're like, they're not writers. They're just coming up with their own thing, and maybe it's good, maybe it's not. It's usually not. But give McFarlane some credit. Like, the dude sought out other, writers and stuff. So like eventually, like, Neil Gaiman, and that I got stuff to say about that, of course. Like Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Frank Miller, like all these amazing, like he saw the need for those guys to come in and like do some stuff on this book. So at least, don't give him full credit because that didn't really work out super great. But that is interesting. I wonder what it is about him. Like, he seemed to really respect these other writers in a way. And one of the things I actually found out doing some research was that he actually tried to start a union. Like before they left Marvel and created Image, he actually started to try to create a union with the just different artists and stuff, and it just didn't work out.
And they go, well, we're improving rights for freelancers, and because I wanted to start a union. I tried to start a union, and I couldn't get scared artists to sort of gather. So that group of Image was about as good as I was ever going to get to.
But and also I didn't know that he tried to bring writers into Image. Like when they were leaving Marvel, he tried to bring writers with him, and they just didn't believe it would work out and didn't want to leave. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I never heard that. So of course, he's known for Spider-Man. Like I said, I never read any of this stuff. This is just a reprint I have. I don't really have much of his Spider-Man stuff.
Spider-Man, when I took over Spider-Man, I thought he was in the doldrums. He was wearing a 60s hairdo, 60s clothes, 60s cars. I mean, his girlfriend, his wife at that time, Mary Jane, she was a model, a New York model, but she wore clothes that looked like came from Kmart. And she didn't have, I guess, a curling iron or a blow dryer because her hair was completely limp and straight. I mean, it was, what are you talking about here? So I'm going to make her look like a glamour model, which is what she was, and I'm going to dress the guy up like a current-day 22-year-old photographer in New York City, right?
So he gets his own Spider-Man title, sells like crazy because they have all these different crazy covers and stuff. And I'd never read this. I've never read this storyline before until recently. I just kind of I got this from the library and just read it not long ago. Not that great. I don't think it holds up. I think the art's fine. I mean, it's it's McFarlane, but I was not really impressed with this storyline. It's got all the Spider-Man stuff you would want as far as the art goes, but yeah, the story, I was just kind of like, I could barely, so this was the first, I think this is the first one that he wrote on his own, and that's a big part of the problem with this book. There's a lot of stuff, and Spawn's kind of the same way. It's like so many words, especially when they're showing all like the news reporters and stuff. It's a lot to, I don't know. I found like the art in this was just a little too busy, which might be kind of funny to even complain about with these guys. But I don't know. It wasn't like terrible at all. But it was just like I didn't dig it as much as I thought I would. But anyway, he leaves Spider-Man. They tell him how to draw like a panel or something. He didn't like that, so he leaves.
Believe in cause and effect? Drop a glass, the glass breaks. strike a match and a fire starts. Do the things we do in this life screw you in the one that comes after? I think so.
So the issue of Spider-Man that I did read, of course, was the crossover with Liefeld's X-Force. And this was like an all sideways issue. It's actually a pretty interesting gimmick. But yeah, this was I think his last issue where he said to heck with it. Assist by Rob Liefeld. They used to always ink each other's pages and stuff. McFarlane even inked that first that cover with the first appearance of Cable. Because these dudes, it's so funny to think of them as like young kids around Marvel, just hanging around each other, like working on each other's boards, inking each other's stuff. And then they become these like crazy millionaires who would start to fight with each other eventually. But yeah, this issue, super cool. I loved it at the time. Oh, that's interesting. But yeah, I haven't read this in a long time. It looks kind of goofy now, but I still like seeing his Cable though. But yeah, this was the only. I wasn't really super familiar with him until I, got into Spawn. Huh. Yeah. So there it is. Like, to all of your readers of the past few years, thanks. It's been a blast, and he's done. And so Spawn is actually a character that Todd created as a kid. I think he was like 12 or something like that. And the character originally had more like a sci-fi kind of bent toward it, as opposed to the supernatural thing. But the costume was actually pretty much already there. But yeah, so I was going to talk about the storytelling just a little bit, just the artwork. It's comparing it to Youngblood, I mean, it's already like so much better. But even just like the backgrounds, like getting a sense of where this takes place, you definitely get that a lot more here. Like it definitely feels like this takes place in New York. For the most part, whereas like Youngblood's supposed to take place in LA, and it doesn't look anything like LA. But every time I see like this news stuff, every time I see like reporters like this, with straight up television things, I always think of Dark Knight Returns. Frank Miller. I'm sure other people have done that, but I always think of Dark Knight Returns stuff from Miller. And I don't really care for it that much, especially when it's this much text. As a reader, I just always get to it and I'm like, oh my gosh. It's just a slog to get through all that sometimes. And this is another thing he does. He does these grid panels for a few pages, and those work great. And I think I thought that was pretty inventive. It's kind of a simple thing, but like taking the panels and just kind of like skewing them a bit. And again, I don't, as far as like the storytelling goes, I don't think this clock really adds much. And I don't think he even sticks to that. He does a lot. So he does these like grid panels, and then he just does a ton of these splash pages and double splash page. And this is a story like a panel layout thing that it doesn't work. Like dudes floating over the city, that's no good. That's a great city, and that's a great way to like ground a panel. Like if they were they just don't need to be there. Like these word bubbles could be there, and we would still probably know who they are. I don't know. That just doesn't work. It just looks really weird. But this is this has some good flow to it. This little action scene here, I think this works. Like he has some decent, like throwing him out the window and then going back to him like at that angle. Like I think that works pretty good. So McFarlane's been, he's been a pro for like over a decade, I think, when this comes out. So he knows what he's doing for the most part. His inking has like, so much he uses like a nib back then. He inks digitally now, but back then he used a nib and just has so much little scratchy things going on that adds all this detail, which, I don't really mind it too much. But and here, so he does he'll occasionally do like some interesting panel layouts. He did it in Spider-Man, and he even like does the spider webs here. I don't know if that's like a reference to Spider-Man or what, but he would do things like do panels, like panel grids as the chains, you know, because Spawn is known for those chains. He would do things like that would be pretty, like, you know, different and stand out. And but clearer, like, 'cause sometimes, like, as much as I love, like, Sam Keith, he would do, like, crazy panel layouts, and sometimes I think that would lose the reader, especially, like, someone who didn't really know. I remember reading the Max and just being like, what panel do I read next? As much as I love the Max, but McFarlane would do that a little bit. He would experiment a little bit. For the most part, it worked, but again, it's just too much text. This too, man. He really needed to, like, cut down all the text in this. But as far as most of the, you know, the storytelling goes, it's not bad. It's not, especially for one of these first Image comics, not bad at all. So this, one of the things that's interesting about these early issues, so it was edited by Wanda. That's probably her maiden name, I guess. I don't know, but that's his wife. So, like, the wife, Al Simmons's wife in the story is named Wanda after McFarlane's wife, but she was the editor. And I watched an interview where she talked about, like, in the 5th issue of Spawn kills, like violently murders this bad guy, and she was trying to plead with Todd to not have it be so crazy and violent and ridiculous, and he's like, no, I'm not changing it. So she quit. She quit as editor on that issue, but she eventually becomes, like, she becomes the COO of all of McFarlane's companies. So, and I watched this documentary where, like, so she takes over the toys and you know, just everything Spawn. It was interesting, but she was on this, like, conference call, and it was like all these. The thing I thought was interesting. This is like 94 or something, or 95 when that video was being shot, and it was all these women, like, that were running the company, and I thought that was interesting. I think a lot of them were people from his family and stuff, but, like, in the video, like, they weren't even pointing it out or anything that was interesting, but I thought it was. But so, and this guy is based on a friend of his. There's a lot of stuff, like, even so, main character is Al Simmons, like, that's the name of a friend of his, and eventually that guy Todd would sue that guy because he was trying to, I guess, profit off of being, like, he wrote a book that said, like, I'm the real Spawn, or the life of the real Spawn, or something like that. So Todd sued him, and that's another, you know, that'll be a theme as I talk about Todd. I was trying to think of the other day about just the Image guys in general. I was trying to think of a way to describe them then and now. So, like, when they were launching their books, and this is what I came up with. So Todd was the angry one. Like, he seemed like any interviews I saw where he was talking about, especially those early interviews, he was so mad and just so pissed at Marvel and just the industry as a whole, who just didn't respect creators at all. So I listed him as the angry one and the best businessman making the worst legal decisions. Again, getting to all these ridiculous legal battles he has. And so Liefeld, I wrote the rock star kid and the odd man, and then eventually the odd man out, and then back in, because I didn't cover this in my Youngblood video, but so Rob is, like, kicked out. He's eventually kicked out of Image because he had tried to steal Michael Turner away from Silvestri's Top Cow, which is, hearing him defend it was actually interesting because, and related to Spawn, so, like, when they created Image, like, one of their rules was you can't interfere with any of the other founders' businesses or their studios or whatever. But, like, so Rob was saying that Todd stole Danny Meeke, Rob's inker, for Spawn. So, like, I think when Greg Capullo takes over, Danny Meeke started inking. He left Youngblood to ink that. And so Rob was like, well, I guess it's open season then, like, poaching artists from all these other studios. So that's that was his, like, defense of trying to poach Michael Turner from Top Cow. But that got him kind of like Nixon. So, like, they were about to vote him out, but he knew that he didn't have the votes, so Rob quit before he could get taken out. But he eventually came back, and everybody made up. And then they tried to do that Image United thing that did that Image thing that of course it would do, where it was never finished and was late and all that stuff. But anyway, so getting back to my description, so I also wrote that, so Jim Lee was the company man, the golden boy, and then for now, I was thinking like he's the company man, like, so Jim Lee was kind of like, so Todd, I watched an interview where Todd talked about, he was really shocked that they could even get Jim Lee, because he was considered like, you know, a good company guy, like he wasn't like putting up the fights that I think that Rob and Todd were having with Marvel, so they didn't even think he would come, but because he was just such this good like company man. But he did, and then, you know, eventually would be the one who would leave Image and sell all of his characters to DC and become the company man again. And all right, so Valentino, I put he's the Image Comics guy who's risking it all, because like Valentino was just like, he was not Todd, he was not Rob or Jim Lee. Like, I think he had more to risk, and he was older, so he had kids and stuff. You know, like I think like Todd had. A lot of them, like Todd and Jim Lee, I think had like babies and stuff, which is that's a big risk. But they had like these huge paydays from some of their other work, and I don't think Valentino had that. I'm sure Valentino was selling pretty good, but I don't think he had like it wasn't like a sure thing the way it was for the other guys. And so for Valentino, like now, I don't really know. I don't know much. I guess he's still running Shadowline, his imprint there, but I don't know much about it. So Eric Larson, I wrote that he was the adult in the room, and now I thought of him as the last man standing, because like Spawn, like so Spawn and Savage and Eric Larson's Savage Dragon, that's the only Image book that's steadily gone this whole time. So I think like Spawn is up to like almost issue 300, which is pretty astounding. Of course, McFarlane like stops drawing it after like 15 issues, like I said, but still, it's impressive. But like, Eric Larson was essentially like Jim Valentino. He's like the older guy. He's kind of trying to make the adult decisions, and he eventually would become the publisher at Image Comics. Pretty important dude to the company overall. And Silvestri, like one of the other things, like Todd and Rob in these interviews would say like Silvestri was their favorite artist. Like Silvestri was the one that they saw as the best artist out of them all, which I thought that was kind of interesting, because I never really read that much Silvestri, but I never thought of him as the best. I don't even know. I would have thought Jim Lee would be what they would say, because that's probably what I would have always said. And the last guy, Portasio, I wrote he's the missing in action. He's the guy who was supposed to be, you know, launching a book, but never, or he did eventually, but it just took a while. And he's another one of those guys where I don't really know what he's up to now. But anyway, that's just those early Image guys, just some thoughts I had of those guys early on. So as far as this issue goes, man, I'm telling you. So guy's dead. He's trying to figure out who he is and what happened. I like that. So like in Youngblood, they wouldn't do like the CNN thing, because Rob, you know, wouldn't want to have any legal problems. But of course, McFarlane, he sure does. He puts it in there. He's not a stranger to legal problems. Obviously, I don't think that CNN's not going to sue over that. But that's just what I thought of when I saw it. Like, of course, McFarlane wouldn't care. So anyway, he's killed. And it turns out, like, eventually you learn that Chapel from Youngblood was the one who killed him. And I think, like, they once they had that falling out with Rob, I think that they retconned that to where Chapel wasn't the guy who killed Spawn or something. I didn't keep up with Spawn, as you can imagine. A lot of people did. I was thinking the other day, like, I remember talking to this guy, this redneck guy that I barely knew, and he found out that I liked comics, and this is like, I think this was around like 2000 or something like that. And he found out that I liked comics, and he's like, oh man, I love Spawn. Did you ever read Spawn? And that's the kind of thing that that kind of sums up Spawn to me, where it's like, no matter who you are or like what's, you know, at some point you've met some dude who wanted to talk to you about Spawn. Probably like a redneck dude. He just, the appeal that this character had, like, it's hard, like, if you didn't see it, like, I don't know if you understand, like, of course there was the cartoon, the HBO cartoon, and the live action movie that was terrible, but like, and the action figures, just tons of action figures, but he really was huge, man, and he probably, like, give him credit, this ridiculous character. He probably got a lot of people, you know, reading comics into the comic stores that wouldn't have otherwise. And hopefully they eventually got onto good books. You know, if there was a good shop owner would probably try to steer them towards like Preacher or something, you know, something more interesting. But anyway, so as far as the book goes, guy, you know, comes back from the dead, wants to see his wife. I pretty much already covered all this. That's kind of nice. This first issue has this poster in it. It's pretty sweet. I wouldn't have dared ever taken this out of my first issue and hung it up though. But it's pretty nice to get. Didn't have like, you know, he didn't do a ton of alternate covers the way Spider-Man did, but he gave us a poster. That's kind of nice. So anyway, the guy wakes up in the alleys of New York. He's homeless, doesn't know what's going on. He starts getting like flashes of memories of this wife that he wanted to come back for. It's not super interesting. It's all right. Yeah, I don't know. Then you get all this Malbosia stuff, like all the devil demons and all that stuff. I never really understood. And like I said, there's this clock. I think when I started reading this again, I was thinking, I don't think this is how it worked, but I thought the clock was like, so he's supposed to be like this hell spawn that's going to like lead the army of hell. And I was thinking like he had this limited amount of powers, and every time he would use the power, this clock would count down. And I was thinking like it would, like this clock would be counting down to like Armageddon or something. Like every time he would use his power, he could use his powers to help people, but every time he did, he was bringing Armageddon closer or something. That's what I was thinking it was, but that's not the case at all. Like from what I can tell, I think he, like if he used all his powers up, there would just be another spawn that would take his place, and he would just go to hell and wait for Armageddon. I don't know. I thought my thing sounded more interesting, but I don't even know what the actual. That's what I'm saying. Like I do not understand what the rules were about all this.
What are the rules? Oh Christ, I'm singing again. What are the rules when you've just turned black and you can't switch back? Well, you gotta go and find out the rules.
Like the suit's alive and the chains, it's all alive, and it's like a weird symbiote, kind of like Venom or something, but I never understood what any of that meant exactly. There's all these things where it's like maybe some interesting stuff is going on and maybe they fleshed it out eventually. I don't know. But I don't know. This first issue like barely touches on it. You get these like, you know, Sam and Twitch, these the cops that are trying to investigate what's going on. And then you get this like Dale Keown pinup of Pitt, because Pitt's on the way, you guys. And you get this is kind of interesting. George Perez, that's pretty good. George Perez Spawn pinup, that's pretty interesting. I don't know if Perez ever did any Image stuff. I don't know. I'm not really sure if he did or not. But that's about it, you guys. Then you get some spawning ground. That is not clever. Yeah. So there's that.
Are you sure you know the difference between good and evil? As you race around trying to put food on the table, or pass your exams, or make love, are you confident that you could distinguish the forces of light from the forces of evil? I'm Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn, and to me there's nothing out there in life that is all black or all white.
So let's talk legal problems. So this is Spawn number 9. So like I said, you know, Todd had the good sense to, you know, seek out some of the best writers in the industry, like then and now. These guys are still the best. Neil Gaiman, he writes issue 9. And so the crazy thing is, so like, so McFarlane and all those guys, all these Image guys leave Marvel. They leave Marvel so they can own their own stuff. And then they set up these studios where, you know, people are working for them and not owning their own creations. You know, like the Image guys are, you know, Todd's owning Spawn and all that. But it was billed to these writers that they could own, you know, they could own their stuff. So Gaiman creates this medieval Spawn and this character, Angela, and this other character like Cogliostro or something. I don't even know. But yeah, I think that guy maybe. I don't know. Not important. But anyway, so Todd goes on to make action figures of her, and I think she's in the movie, all that stuff. And Gaiman sees, you know, no pay for all that stuff for this character he created. And of course he sues, and there's this years-long lawsuit. You know, and eventually Gaiman wins. And Gaiman wins the, you know, control of this character, and he sells it to Marvel. You can research all that if you want. The thing that's funny is just like the irony of it, I guess. It's just crazy. But yeah, Todd McFarlane not shy about wanting to get involved with these like crazy legal battles. And let me tell you, as someone, I'm not going to talk much about this, but I personally had some legal issues. Nothing like no one sued anybody or anything like that. I did have to hire a lawyer. It wasn't something someone was trying to do something, and I was trying to stop them. It's not something I really have talked about. It's been over for years, and I got what I wanted essentially. But the thing is, with something like that, it costs money. Like my thought is like no one wins these legal battles, not really, because it costs so much for these stupid lawyers. Like every time you get an email, boom, your lawyer's charging you. Every time. You know, anytime their lawyer emails your lawyer, you're getting charged. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. It's not something you want to be a part of. Like, even if someone's like, because I hear this all the time, like, oh, you should sue them. You'll totally win. You're not going to win because, like, so the thing, I was trying to get someone to stop doing something because they came out of nowhere and just like, hey, we're going to do this. And I was like, no, you're not. And essentially, my lawyer told me, like, don't even send them a cease and desist letter because that could start a lawsuit right there. If you get to the point where you get into a full-fledged lawsuit, my lawyer told me, like, it could cost, at minimum, it could be $10,000 a month to keep this lawsuit going. And I was going up against someone who was crazy rich. So there was no way I was going to, like, try to get into a legal battle. I was just trying to get them to stop the stupid thing they were doing. And I kind of set up this situation where I was calling their bluff. I was like, well, they tried to buy me off with like peanuts. It's a crazy story. But anyway, just don't. And McFarlane, like he names, like, there's this mobster guy he names after a hockey player. So that guy sues him and he wins eventually and just gets millions out of it. And like I said earlier, like, so that the real Al Simons guy, Todd sued him. It's just, geez Louise. I think, you know, once you get to the point where you're a millionaire, no matter what business that you're in, you're going to need a lawyer, and you're probably going to be, you know, involved in some kind of legal dispute at some point. I get that, but I'm just saying, like, avoid it at all costs if possible. But anyway, forget all that. Let's check out this Jim Lee poster in this issue number 9. Interesting that they left it black and white. Jim Lee doing some Spawn work. That's pretty awesome. Anyways, legal stuff. Avoid those problems. Get a lawyer if you have to. You know, don't sue anybody unless you absolutely have to. Or, you know, whatever. Just avoid it. So Todd sticks with drawing the book up until like issue like 15 or 16, 17, somewhere around there. And Capullo takes over. And one of the things I read was that he actually left drawing it for a while because he was working on this. This is the Spawn Batman crossover. This is the Image one. So they actually did 2. They did a DC version and an Image version. They did this a few times with crossovers where, like, there'd be a Marvel one and a DC one or something like that, or different company like Valiant and Image did that kind of too with Deathmate, where there was the Valiant ones and the Image ones. But anyway, these tell 2 separate stories altogether, and I haven't actually read these, I think, 10, 15, maybe 20 years. This one's got some pretty good art. I remember this one not being as good, but it's Klaus Janson drawing it, so not bad art. I wouldn't mind maybe giving it another read, see how it is. But the important one is this one, because I mean, Frank Miller writing, Todd drawing it. It's, you know, has the Spawn art team working on it, and I'm not sure it would hold up today. But so, you know, this is Todd returning to Batman, who he'd worked on earlier, as I showed you. It's like, you would think, I guess there's like cyborgs. I don't even remember what was going on in this book. That is a funny looking Batman. But it's just, I remember I couldn't have been more into this when this came out. I don't think I was super familiar with Frank Miller that much back then. This is probably my introduction to Frank Miller. Honestly, the first Frank Miller stuff I might have read was probably Spawn comics. That's embarrassing, but whatever. I think that's right. But you know, a lot of cape stuff going on in this book. But yeah, I think people have talked about there being a new one of these, and a lot of, you know, there's always been that talk of Spawn Spider-Man crossover, or just Todd returning to Spider-Man in general. That does not seem likely. One of those interviews I've been watching lately, he was talking about Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld returning to Marvel to do the Heroes Reborn. And boy, he was still, like, it's been like 20 years or something. He's still pretty pissed about that. And like the case he made, it actually kind of like, it made sense to me. You know, he's like, this is your business. Image Comics is your business that we're all, you know, in together. We all, you know, signed contracts to say that, you know, we wouldn't interfere with anyone else's business. And you're putting comics on the stands to compete, you know, with this other publisher. You're putting comics on the stands that will compete for our dollars, and that's against our interests. So he was really mad, and I get it. But boy, they paid Rob and Jim Lee $3 million apiece. So, you know, there's no way they could turn that down. Especially like it was getting close to that time where, you know, the boom was over, and they had those big studios. Jim Lee and Liefeld had their studios to keep going. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this crossover, golly, a lot to read here. Like I said, I haven't read this in forever. I'm not sure if it's good, but I remember really wanting more. I remember loving it. And it ends with that. Like, this was interesting. So like when Spawn comes back, I think when on Capullo's run, he has that stitched up face, and I think it's from this. Interesting. But yeah, this one's worth tracking down. This is one, like, you see Spawn comics and Image comics in general in 50-cent bins all the time, but you don't see this one. This is one it might be a little harder to track down. Another thing I was going to talk about is just all the Todd McFarlane kind of wannabes out there. And this was one that I loved. This was, man, I can't remember how to say his name. Trent Canigua? I don't know. But it was a book called Creed, and he definitely had like McFarlane stuff going on. And this one was like, this was pretty popular indie comic back in the day, and I dug it. But it's definitely one of those McFarlane looking books. There's a lot of people like aping McFarlane's style. I mean, he was like, you know, essentially the #1 artist of that time, so it's not surprising. But yeah, this was put out by Lightning Comics. I think it was picked up by someone else later. But yeah, Creed. I don't know if anybody remembers it, but boy, I dug it for a while. And speaking of aping Todd McFarlane, here's the cover of issue 2. And here's the drawing I did of it in 1992. So I'm trying to think of, man, what year of school I was in at that point. Probably like freshman. I was probably like a freshman in high school, and I did this in art class. I remember drawing this. I'm not sure the camera can pick it up. It's pretty ridiculous. Those bats aren't bad though, honestly. I didn't trace them, I don't think. Let me look. I'm actually interested. I don't know. I don't think I did, but oh, it's pretty close. I don't think so. But certainly, I don't think so. I remember drawing it in art class, so I don't think I traced it. Plus, I don't think I would have, like, back then I was so protective of my comics. I don't think I would have put like paper over this. I thought it was going to be worth like $1 million. But either way, you know, like I was looking at like other drawings of mine, like from the time. There's like some bad Liefeld stuff. Like, so take, you know, me looking at Liefeld and trying to draw his stuff, just horrifying. But then, like, you know, at least this is a little better than that. So I'll give Todd some credit. Maybe he made me a better artist. I don't know. Probably not. But I thought that was I remember, it's so funny because like a lot of these drawings, I don't remember drawing them at all. But this one, for whatever reason, I really remember drawing this. I used to do this thing where I even did it in like the beginning of art college, where I would like lay down some really light, you know, graphite to shade, and I would like blend that with some like tissue paper or something, or to just kind of like smear it, give this like kind of like an airbrushed effect. And the guy who airbrushed these covers was so great. I'm not sure how many of these he did. Just a few, like maybe just the post. He did the poster in here. Yeah, so he did this poster. Stici? I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. But and he did the cover to the first issue and the second issue, and then by the third issue, it's not him anymore. It's just like a colorist. But man, these first few covers, just fantastic stuff.
I'm Stan Lee, but hold the applause. Listen, we have a real treat for you this time. I've got Rob Liefeld, and I don't seem to recall your name. Todd McFarlane, yes, we've met before.
So one of the other things, obviously, about Todd that's super interesting was, so he goes, Spawn #1's getting ready to come out. He goes to Mattel, tries to get them to make Spawn toys, and there's kind of conflicting stories here. One thing said, like, Mattel just says no, and then another thing I read said that, like, they just couldn't produce the level of detail and the gore that he was looking for. And but anyway, so the Mattel deal doesn't work out. And as you probably know, Todd just decides, I'm going to do this myself. And so then he starts his own toy line. That's right, I've got some Todd toys here. I got some... So when the toy line first launches, it's called Todd Toys. But he has to change the name to McFarlane Toys because Barbie's brother is named Todd, and Mattel, the people who wouldn't make his figures, went after him and said, you need to change that name. So he changes it to McFarlane Toys, which makes way more sense. McFarlane. There's the logo, McFarlane Toys. But anyway, yeah, I have a few of these. I'm not one of those people who had like a ton. They're really dusty because they've been like up at the top of my closet. Not something I display with my my collection, but I still have them. I didn't get a ton of these back in the day, but I did get a few. And you know, they were just toys like this had never been made. Like this is another thing where it's like, give Todd credit where credit is due. This dude changed the toy industry. Like, for better for worse, it's another one of those times where it's like there was toys before this, and then there are toys after this. There was just everything changed.
Straight from the comic book.
Get Spawn!
It's Spawn!
Vertebreaker! Spawn, look out!
Battling evildoers everywhere.
Roar! Go, Spawn!
Live the adventure with Spawn.
Again, for better for worse. But the level of detail on these things that were, you know, like, I mean, they were like statues. They're just, people had never seen anything like this. Articulated statues. And I didn't get a ton of these, but... And he also, like, when the line first launched, the cool thing, he did that cool thing where, you know, he included comics in these figures. So, like, maybe people who'd never read comics were checking out the comic for the first time. It was just genius. I mean, it's kind of simple, but still, it's a really smart thing to do. And I've also got the Max. I think the Max was maybe the first one that I picked up, and that was huge for me. You would think I probably would have picked up all those Youngblood toys, but I didn't get any of those. But man, I was super into the Max. I never opened it either. I should open it now and actually get to play with this thing. But yeah, I was super into this. So then, like, eventually, McFarlane Toys, the thing that was crazy was, so, like, he launched the line at right about the time where, you know, the bust is happening, and, like, all the studios, like the Rob's and Jim Lee's and Silvestri's studio are, like, struggling to keep their artists and struggling to keep sales going at the level that they were, and they're, you know, sales are just plummeting. But Todd had this to go back on and was just killing it in the toy market. And if you don't know, like, that's where the money is. Like, the merchandising on the stuff, they're going to make way more money on this than they ever would a comic. And Todd, I'm sure, like, that's the bulk of all that money he spends on baseballs or whatever. It comes from this stuff, because the markup is just crazy. But, I mean, it's not like he had someone just, you know, showing him how to do it. He figured it all out. I give him credit, because there's no way that that's an easy industry to get into. And then he eventually starts not just doing, like, his toys and not just doing, like, other Image guys. He gets into, like, doing all these horror figures, doing all this licensing stuff, and he's still doing that today. This is the only, like, this is the only other one I got was Army of Darkness figure. Again, like, the level of detail, it's just not something that toys had. But he did, like, Edward Scissorhands, Escape from New York, all, you know, The Thing, all this stuff. Shaft. That's awesome. It's just the foresight to know. Maybe you didn't know, but the foresight to not put all your eggs in one basket is pretty good. It's a pretty good idea. And but anyway, again, like, his wife ran the company, and I think still does, that figured all this stuff out. It's pretty impressive on both of them.
Do you believe the killer should be killed? And if we killed him, do we add to or reduce the evil in this world? I'm Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn.
So 2 years after Spawn number 2, McFarlane actually drew Cyberforce number 8. All the interiors. I think, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think this was like all the Image guys, like all those founding guys, like drew each other's book for an issue or something like that. But if you ever wanted to see McFarlane drawing Stryker and all these Cyberforce guys that Silvestri had, here you go. There's Ripclaw. I barely remember anything about Cyberforce. I think I got the first, like, you know, maybe 3 or 4 issues, if that. I like Silvestri's work on X-Men, but he's one of those guys where when it came to his own stuff, the Cyberforce stuff, I just couldn't get into it. I could barely get into, like, Wildcats and all that stuff, and I love Jim Lee, so... But Silvestri's X-Men stuff is freaking-tastic. Same with Portasio. I loved his X-Men stuff. And even, honestly, kind of the same with Jim Lee. I loved their X-Men stuff, but when it came to all their Image stuff, I just wasn't as into it. Probably because it was just a bunch of nonsense as far as the writing goes. But anyway. So, you know, some solid McFarlane work here. If this is something you're into. I thought this was interesting. So this is advertising Spawn 26. But one of the things I thought was funny, so the ad says, same special edition as always, high-grade paper, computer coloring, and another dazzling cover. I thought it was just funny that they're touting computer coloring. Like, that's a selling point. I thought that's so interesting. I don't think I've ever seen any advertisement that, like, you know, actually bragged about Photoshop coloring. This was like, you know, it's the early days of that, and it honestly was one of the things that set Marvel, or set Image apart from Marvel and DC, because it took a while for those bigger companies to get to that. But I just thought it was funny that they're pointing it out in an ad. But, you know, Cyberforce number 8, check it out if that's what you're into. I just dug this out of a 50-cent bin the other day just to show you guys. You're welcome. And so, like, the culmination of Chapel being the one who killed Spawn, like, all that stuff pays off later in Liefeld's books, his Extreme Studios books, there was a crossover, Extreme Sacrifice. And so in this, Chapel, I guess Chapel dies. I don't know if he committed suicide or something. I don't know. Chapel dies and goes to hell, and then like takes over hell from from the devil. It's a huge crossover. There was like every one of those crazy Liefeld books. It took part in it. It's like I know it's Prophet, New Men, Youngblood, Brigade. I don't even know all the time. They did like a trade paperback, which is actually worth like money now. I think it's worth like $100 at least, because it's had such a low print run. Because Image back then, they just didn't do a lot of trades. And if they did, they didn't print many. But you gotta have some troll in there. I don't think I've ever seen this actual book. I assume it did come out, this Nightmare. I assume Liefeld didn't do the interiors, so I might have seen it and just saw that he didn't draw it, so I never picked it up. But if he drew any of it, like this book isn't all Liefeld, so it's got a Liefeld cover, and I actually really like this drawing of Prophet, even though it's just one of those covers where like everyone's just staring at the towards the front, which is kind of the worst composition for a cover. But anyway, I don't care. I love that drawing of Prophet. But he didn't, so Liefeld just drew a few pages in here. So this is Chapel taking over hell. And so I don't really remember much about Crypt, but I just found out that he's like Prophet from the future, and he was this Prophet villain that was Prophet from the future gone bad or something like that. Sounds awesome. I definitely want to get, if I can find the rest of these, even though they're not Liefeld, they're going to look terrible. I don't care. I got to track those down. But yeah, Chapel takes over hell. And then, like I said, I think, at some point, this is right before, I think, the falling out that Liefeld had with all his Image dudes. And then, like, I think, the Chapel Spawn connection gets, I think, retconned out or whatever. But if you're super into Chapel and what happened to him with all that stuff, check out Extreme Sacrifice. All right, to sum this up, the thing that's interesting to me, one of the things that's interesting about Todd, like all these other Image guys, Todd did not have to work another day of his life in comics, but he did. Was it just for money to keep buying, those baseballs? I don't know. But I really, I don't know, I kind of admire it in a way, because like he did a lot. He wanted to change the industries of comics and toys and stuff like that. And he wanted to get into sports memorabilia. I read one interview said, or no, it was an interview I watched. He said that he would give it all up, all the comic stuff, all the success he's ever had in comics, if he could have become a successful baseball player, like a major league player. I thought that was funny. And so, like, he actually played ball. Like McFarlane went to college on a baseball scholarship and got injured. Like, that's why comics happened. Like, he was interested in art, like, and was going to pursue it on the side, his side career of becoming a major league baseball player. But after his injury, that's when he went full on into art and comics. So if he hadn't been injured, we wouldn't have gotten all this. But anyway, interesting guy. Interesting book, I guess, sometimes. I don't know, it started okay. New movies coming out. McFarlane's directing. And, honestly, like, I poo-poo that. It's easily dismissible. But the thing is, like, McFarlane is a Grammy award-winning... like, he won a Grammy for directing that ridiculous Korn video. Not making this up. He won a Grammy Award for Best Short Form Music Video in 2000 for Freak on a Leash, that Korn song. And he also won an Emmy for the HBO, like, Spawn cartoon. He's got more creds than you might think. Like, so the dude who directed that original Spawn movie, he... he was the first-time director, and, he didn't make a good movie. And that guy actually went on to only direct, like, straight-to-DVD Garfield movies. But, if that guy could make a Spawn movie, why not give it to McFarlane? I'm fine with that. Like, McFarlane said, like, it's going to be like rated R. There's going to be no joy. So it's like, I'm not interested, but I'll watch it eventually for free, but, you know, but whatever. And some of these covers are, you know, still good. I still really dig some of them. He actually is still doing covers occasionally. Like he doesn't draw the book at all. I think he maybe will come in and ink sometimes, but he'll actually like draw and ink covers sometimes. And Spawn is almost up to issue 300 at this point, which is just mind-boggling. But it's just a crazy good run. Even as like just one writer on a book, that's such a crazy long stretch, 300 issues. But so, you know, something else that's kind of impressive. So, you know, like, yes, he has a crazy ego. Yes, you know, he contributed to the speculator boom, especially with all those Spider-Man covers, which, you know, that could have been Marvel and not McFarlane to some extent. Who knows? And yes, you know, he's into baseballs and that cost millions of dollars. But he's been like, you know, a champion of creator rights, even though, you know, like I said, he didn't live up to those things that he championed so much. I'm just saying, like, he deserves some respect. I don't mean to like make excuses for him or all the dumb bad decisions he's made, specifically legal decisions or whatever, but I think he's more interesting than I thought he was before I like watched a bunch of interviews. And the comic Spawn, not as interesting maybe as even just some of the interviews I read from him. But he's one of the most interesting, I think honestly, he's one of the most interesting comic creators in the modern age. Not so much because of the comics, so maybe that doesn't make sense, but like just his overall work that he's done and the decisions he's made are just crazy interesting to me. From a business perspective, you know, from all the moron legal missteps perspective, just crazy interesting. You know, Todd McFarlane, ladies and gentlemen.
I still consider myself to be young, at least at heart. I know physically the birth certificate doesn't say that anymore, but I still think I got 30 years in me, right? So in 30 years, I mean, I've only been at it for 30, which means I'm only halfway there. Mm-hmm. So whatever you think I've done, I think I'm going to double it, right? So that means what's going to be the next hot video game and movie and TV show? I don't know. I just want to be there and still be relevant enough with my companies and our art so that we can maybe pounce on it and have some fun and play in it.
Would you know the devil if you saw him? Would you know his face, his eyes? Would you feel chilled in his presence? Or do you think he's some naked red guy with horns and a goatee and a tail? I'm Todd McFarlane, creator of Spawn. True evil is never what or who you expect. Sometimes it's grotesque, sometimes beautiful, sometimes it's a mobster or a priest, even the ice cream man. For all you know, I could be true evil. Scary, huh?